Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, dear students. Here in this video, we will discuss about good governance as a concept and its relevance to poverty alleviation and community development. So, as we discussed in the previous videos about social capital theory, and we also discussed about community development, its definitions, and we gave the case study of some areas. So, for good governance, it is very much important to understand that there is a big difference between developed countries and developing countries. The main reason behind it is the concept of good governance. So, an introduction, the trajectory of underdevelopment and the focus of affluence can be described as the most disappointing issue in the contemporary globalized world. Why are some developed and others not? Difference lies in the governance structure. So, in the next slide, we will see that bad governance is based on inefficiency, red tape, maladministration, corruption, and in the second we see that good governance follow rule of law, transparency, participation, accountability, and sustainability. So for good governance, it is very much important to follow transparency, rule of law, and participation of the local community, so that to make the governance structure is more strong and efficient for the community development. Here you have seen that good governance is perhaps the single most important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting development. Kofi Annan, the former UN Secretary General, told us that good governance is the only single most important factor in eradicating poverty and promoting development. So, for community development, it is also very much important to bring a community on a proper structure so that to provide sufficient opportunity to each and every individual in any community. So for good governance, it is very much important to bring people together and work together. Good governance is the process of measuring how public institutions conduct public affairs and manage public resources and guarantee the realization of human rights in a manner essentially free of abuse and corruption with due regard for the rule of law. That is very much important. Meaning and components of good governance. Concept of good governance is based on the concept has taken center stage in development thinking and practice since 1990s. Several reasons account for the increasing attention to governance and institutions. Research shows that effectiveness of financial aid depends on good policy environment. So promoting pro-poor growth has now become a major goal in the strategies of international donor organizations. Governance refers to all processes of governing the institutions, processes, and practices through which issues of the community should be solved within that governance system. So all these concepts and several reasons and research for promoting pro-poor growth has now become a major goal and the strategies of international donor organization as well. The concept of good governance over flooded with various meanings and controversial interpretation. What is portends varies across discipline, policy making, rationale, and state and question. Good governance as the provision of the basic necessities of life, and but this is what happens to the freedom of choice and participation. So here the seeming contradiction of what good governance entails can be further elaborated by examining the World Bank, United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, Asia Development Bank, and Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and OECD definition of concepts. So, World Bank, UNDP, Asian Development Bank, and OECD. The World Bank has the definitions that public expenditure transparency must be needed, efficiency of revenue allocation, property rights and rule based, budgetary quality and financial integrity, transparency and accountability, participation, transparency, accountability, equity, and rule of law. Accountability, participation, transparency, predictability is mentioned by Asian Development Bank, and by OECD, efficiency of public service. So when you put together all these important points for any good governance process in developing countries, you will find that there would be absentees of these things, of these important points for the good governance. So we need to focus all these things for the good governance so that to improve our governance system in developing countries. The diagram point to one thing, divergent views about what constitute the basic element of good governance. Notwithstanding, there is still point of unanimity among the stakeholders. There is the need for a state to embrace accountability, transparency, and participation in governance. So we thus define good governance as the responsibility of government and governing bodies to meet the needs of the masses as opposed to select groups in society. When the people ceases to be the subject of discussion but an active participation in the discussion. Governance process is about people and involves people. Here the component of good governance: accountability, transparency, responsive, consensus-oriented, transparent, participatory, inclusive, following rule of law, efficient. So a good governance system is based on the following processes: that there would be accountability within that community, transparency for the projects, for the funds which are allocated for different organizations or for different sectors in public sector, ministries or such type of institutions where it is needed. Responsiveness is very much important, that when there is a flood or some other disaster comes, so the government should have to be very much alert, and on time they have to give responses. So consensus oriented is very much important, because when you have local people, you should have to get their feedback as well. For participatory also, the local people participation is also important. And institutional policy making, local people can give good feedback. Inclusive is also one of important and follow important point. And following rule of law is the law would be the same for everyone. In developing countries, the law is different for rich and for poor, and efficiency is very much important for good governance. So all these concepts should be based on good governance, so that the developing countries may be well organized and the governance system would be well managed. Thank you for watching.